So I was very involved with all things healthy, holistic living, nutrition, exercise, detox, spinal alignment, taking care of your body. And so that was my world for a decade before I stumbled across this whole body of knowledge that changed everything. So it brings in this deep understanding that the body does not make mistakes. The body does what makes sense.
Dr. Melissa Sell has spent years studying and applying the principles of German New Medicine, a revolutionary approach to understanding health and disease. And what she discovered might change everything you thought you knew about how the body works.
Every time a man had testicular cancer, he had some severe loss, a loss of a loved one, a loss of someone very dear to them. Every woman who had glandular or lobular breast cancer had a very profound worry. Everyone who had lung cancer experienced some type of death fright shock. Everyone who had colon cancer was dealing with some very ugly, hard to digest situation. And so he started to see that, okay, these cancers in the body, they're not random, they're not breakdowns, they're not malignancies, they are meaningful.
Imagine a world where illness isn't just some unfortunate inconvenience, but rather a precise biological response to emotional shocks and traumas. Dr. Sell explains how our bodies are designed to adapt, not malfunction, when faced with these events.
When someone is unwell, when they're expressing a symptom, we say, what happened to you? What did you go through? What did you experience? Because your biology is painting the picture. It's telling us a story. If we know a man has had prostate cancer, if we know a woman has breast cancer, we know something about their experience because we know what that organ does and what its purpose is.
This conversation dives deep into how symptoms and diseases are not mistakes, but highly intelligent adaptations. If you've ever wondered why some people, despite doing everything right, still develop illness, this episode may open your eyes.
The body is adapting. So we don't look at the body through the lens of sickness and disease anymore. We look at the body through meaningful adaptation.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Dr. Melissa, how are you?
I am incredible and really happy to be here.
Incredible. Well, I love to hear that. And I'm really excited to talk about German New Medicine, or I actually think there's a new name for it.
Yes. The Germanische Heilkunde, which roughly translates to the Germanic Healing Knowledge.
Germanic Healing Knowledge. And how did this all get on your radar? When did this start to become really something that was alive for you?
Yes, so my history is I'm a chiropractor, and so I was very involved with all things healthy, holistic living, nutrition, exercise, detox, spinal alignment, taking care of your body, understanding that there are things that you can do to improve and optimize your health. And so that was my world for a decade before I stumbled across this whole body of knowledge that changed everything. So it brings in this deep understanding that the body does not make mistakes. The body does what makes sense. So even things that we look at as disease or sickness, I used to think, so the conventional world thinks that sickness and disease comes from little germs or little genes, things that are going wrong, things that are broken, things that are malicious or malignant, doing something bad in the body. And I moved away from that idea and moved into, we can improve our health through eating the right thing and detoxing and, exposing ourselves to sunlight and doing all these healthy activities. But even in that world of doing all the healthy things, sometimes people would still develop what we would call disease. They would have, the picture of health. This person would develop cancer or, have a heart attack. And it just seems like, wow, they seem
bad luck,
doing everything right. So it's like, is it just bad luck at that point? But then comes the German New Medicine, the discovery of Dr. Hamer. And so his story is integral to this whole body of work. And so in 1978, Dr. Hamer, he was a medical doctor. He practiced medicine. He had several medical patents, and so his dream was to make these really cool patents and make money off of that, and then just treat people for free in the countryside. And so he had a beautiful medical practice, and his son went on a trip with his sister, and it's a crazy event. And if you want to watch this documentary, it's called The King Who Never Was. And basically, the exiled crown prince of Italy went a little mad and shot a gun, and Dr. Hamer's son was sleeping on this boat. And the prince shot this gun, and the bullet went through the side of the boat and hit Dr. Hamer's son. Wow. And then he was, airlifted to the hospital. It was just this whole crazy story, trying to get him the care that he needed to be treated. And it was a 3 or 4 month process of he had his leg amputated, and it's, is he going to survive? Is he not? And then he ended up passing away at 17 years old in his father's arms. And a few months after that, Dr. Hamer discovered he had testicular cancer. And as a healthy man, he never had a history of cancer in his family. He knew intuitively that there was a connection between the loss of his son and this cancer that he developed. And so he went on to be the head of an oncology ward, where he obviously had access to a lot of cancer patients, where he could start to test this theory. And he began to speak with the people who had the diagnosis of cancer, and he was very interested in what happened to you. What happened to you prior to this diagnosis? And he started noticing a pattern, and genius is pattern recognition. And so a pattern started to emerge. So every time a man had testicular cancer, he had some severe loss, a loss of a loved one, a loss of someone very dear to them. Every woman who had glandular or lobular breast cancer had a very profound worry. She was very worried about someone she loved, a child, for the home, for her nest. Everyone who had lung cancer experienced some type of death fright shock. Everyone who had colon cancer was dealing with some very ugly, hard to digest situation. And so he started to see that, okay, these cancers in the body, they're not random. They're not breakdowns. They're not malignancies. They are meaningful. And as he's having these realizations and he's studying these files and he's making these connections, his son came to him in a dream and is like, "Dad, you're on to something." Wow. And he's like, "But there's more. There's more for you to discover." And so through these discoveries, he develops this theory, and then he starts testing it, and he starts from this, this insight he has codified 5 biological laws that are nature's laws, so he just put words to how nature operates. And he found that what we are looking at as disease or dysfunction is not an error. It is not a mistake. The 5th biological law is the quintessence. It's this deep knowing that nature doesn't make mistakes. It only does what makes sense. It is biological, and it's all about living. It's a life principle that the body has within it adaptive capacities to transform the organs when we are in a state of crisis, when there has been a shock, something that is highly acute and dramatic and catches you off guard, for which you were not prepared, and you feel so isolated in the moment. Your biology says, "I can help." It steps in. And before you even have a conscious thought to describe what it is that happened to you, your body's on the scene. Your biology is stepping in to adapt. And so if we really just think about this, when we think about Dr. Hamer, he lost his son. So this is the continuation of the species. Biologically, this is a huge deal, and it goes so much further beyond psychology. It's not just about, your conscious thoughts. This is about biology. This is about continuing the species, which is of utmost importance, right? It is the most important thing is to continue life, is to live and then to reproduce and to share the gift of life. And so nature has so many backup mechanisms in order to ensure that life continues so we can keep playing the game. And so if you just think about it, okay, testicular cancer. So there is a lump in this man's testicles. And, conventional thinking says, "Oh no, this is bad. It shouldn't be happening. Cut it out. Get rid of it." But if we think about it and we think about why would nature do this? If nature does what makes sense, right? We see little weeds growing up through the cracks in the cement. It's like, isn't that interesting? Because life says, "I'm coming forth." Life wants to come forth. And so the testicles, what's the purpose, right? It's procreation. And so if we lose our offspring, wouldn't it make sense that the deep wisdom in the ancient biology would say, we must enhance the testicles in order to reproduce what was lost? And then when you look at every organ in the body is a brilliant idea of nature, right, to sustain life. And so when there is what we're calling cancer, it is an enhancement of a tissue that is needed for an emergency situation. So if we're in a death fright shock, oh my goodness, I am being chased down by something that I think I'm going to die. Wouldn't it be the most important thing to be able to absorb more oxygen so that I can have more energy out to my tissue so I'm able to get out of this emergency situation? It's like, well, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense that the body would do that. And so that's the story, is that every tissue in the body has a meaningful purpose, and it has the ability, depending on the unique flavor of the experience that you went to turn on different adaptations. And at first, Dr. Hamer thought it just applied to cancer, but as he kept studying and observing, he found, no, this applies to a pimple. It applies to a cold sore. It applies to a sneeze. All of these things are how your consciousness is adapting to the safety or danger of your environment. And as things catch you off guard, as you have little shocks, little surprises, the body is adapting. The body is adapting. So we don't look at the body through the lens of sickness and disease anymore. We look at the body through meaningful adaptation. And so when someone is unwell, when they're expressing a symptom, we say, what happened to you? What did you go through? What did you experience? Because your biology is painting the picture. It's telling us a story. If we know a man has had prostate cancer, if we know a woman has breast cancer, we know something about their experience because we know what that organ does and what its purpose is.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a paradigm shift, and I absolutely love it. And there's kind of multiple things coming up for me. So one is this just higher level idea of like our body, it's happening for us, like it's trying to help us. But a lot of things that I've studied and experiences that I have are kind of along the lines of this idea that the body is an expression of the consciousness, right? And so as things in our consciousness come up to be healed for our evolution, it shows up in the body as a way to get our attention. And you start to see that the body's actually giving you opportunities out of love, out of benevolence to heal and evolve. And so, yeah, it kind of feels like a distinct, like related, but slightly different mechanisms going on here. One is like preservation. The other is evolution, and specifically the evolution of consciousness. And I'm curious, does German medicine talk about that at all? Like the spiritual component of some of these theories?
Well, absolutely. So everything about it's the soul's journey. So we go through and we have this shock. Ooh, something unexpected takes us off guard. And in order to adapt, right, we have to evolve. And so it really is. It's like it is the mechanism of how things overcome challenges and how the spirit, how the soul, we go on this journey. And when we are living out of alignment, when things happen that are shocking and sudden and unexpected, the biology has a plan. And through that, when we connect it to the consciousness, and there is a distinction because these biological laws, they apply to every living thing, every animal. Animals, and that's the beautiful thing when you look at how consciousness has materialized itself into this intelligent body. And that's how I look at it, as I see that every organ, it's the consciousness in the body that is expressing a certain thing that is needed in order to go from, immaterial to material. So in order to have this material physical experience, this is the consciousness conveying that wisdom through the ability to adapt, So the skin is about connection. It's about touch. And Dr. Hamer looks at each of the tissue layers. This was one of the mind-blowing things that I was like, oh, this is incredible. He looked at embryology. So ontology, we have to look at the origin, the ontogenetic. Where did this start, right? Where did this come from? We look at the embryo and we look at the different differentiation of all the tissues. And that's the cool thing when someone's having a symptom in some organ, right? Again, this organ is a divine idea, in the mind of consciousness. And so it is this beautiful expression, but each tissue, each germ layer, it has a certain function and a meaning. So we've got the oldest layer, which is about survival. It's about breathing and reproducing. It's about the most basic functions. And then we have a layer that's about protection. We have a layer that is about our self-value and our ability. And then we have the layer that's about community and connection. And so each of this, the organization of the tissue layers, of how the brain operates, it really is. It's such a brilliant design. And obviously there is a grand intelligence that's orchestrating all of it in order for us to have this unique human experience, and it had to be conveyed through, the molding of these tissues, which I just think is brilliant and beautiful, and such an honor to witness and to understand the depth of, what consciousness is the game that consciousness is playing, I think.
Yeah, and I do want to get into the brain because I know there's actually some pretty amazing scientific evidence that aligns to our current paradigm, even though we know that has a lot of limitations. But I think a couple examples would be just amazing to kind of just really cement this point in. And I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who's been practicing German New Medicine. She's had acne or face issues her whole life. And through working with German New Medicine, she discovered a pattern in the consciousness that she needs to protect herself. And so her interpretation is the skin was literally creating a protective barrier against the outside world, keeping her safe. Her body was adapting based on the information and instructions in her consciousness to help her. Now, did she want that particular adaptation of help? Like, probably not ideal, but it's just so it's just like such a mindset shift. And I'd be curious if you have other specific examples where it was like relates something that's happening in someone's consciousness, how that shows up physically, and like supports this idea of the body trying to help us.
Exactly. So yes, that was one of my first experiences with the German New Medicine, was with acne myself, because that was something I dealt with. And I went through the whole journey of, it's the food, right? And so I had to cut out all the foods, and at first I thought it was bacteria on my skin, and if I just killed all the bacteria, I would use literally like rubbing alcohol, kill the bacteria, right? Because there's this idea bacteria is bad, and it's getting in your pores, and it's infecting your pores, and that's what's causing this. And then I went to the food, and then I went to the gut healing and the probiotics
all
and the sauerkraut.
Things,
I went through every single, and it wasn't until GNM and Dr. Hamer, and understanding that this is the dermis skin, so the deeper layer of skin that's controlled from the cerebellum. And it is a conflict of feeling attacked or feeling soiled or feeling disfigured. And why does this happen to young teenagers, right? When they're very concerned with the way I look. Do I look okay? Right? Am I pretty enough? And so we see that when you are feeling disfigured or feeling ugly, that your body does go through this adaptation, or feeling attacked. Someone screams at you, and you're feeling just like, I need to protect myself. And the skin steps in, proliferates additional tissue to create this protection, this barrier. And then once you're back into safety, the body breaks down that shield using bacteria. And that's one of the really brilliant things. The fourth biological law is the bacteria. They are not the enemies. We have been falsely accusing bacteria as being the cause of infection and illness, but they come in, they're the little microsurgeons. They're like, oh, you don't need this barrier anymore because you're no longer feeling attacked, and so it decomposes it. And so, yes, that's one of the many brilliant examples. Another one, a mother she was dealing with terrible psoriasis, which is an inflammatory skin condition where the skin is angry and red, but also flaky and itchy. It's going through what it is. It's a double separation conflict. And so that means she is constantly feeling wanting contact or not wanting contact with someone. And as we dug into the story, and she was a great example of doing all the right things, right? The sauna and the detox and the supplements, and she just tried absolutely everything, but couldn't get this under control. And so we had to find out the story. And the story was that she was in an emotionally abusive marriage for many years and really wanted to get out of it, but she had a young child. And so when the divorce was final, she was so relieved that that she was no longer going to have to be, in the home with a person that was emotionally abusive. But the child is now legally obligated to leave her, to be torn from her, and to, have shared time with the other parent. And so this was so devastating for her because she didn't want the child to be emotionally traumatized in the same way she was. So the skin, it's about touch, it's about communication, it's about separation. And so she felt every time that her child had to go and to be with the ex-spouse, that the child was torn from her. And so her body, when you have a separation conflict, the body helps you, one, by numbing the skin. There's loss. There's micro ulcerations in the skin to numb the area. There's also memory loss. So people who deal with dementia, with memory issues, think about how merciful nature is being. You know, the story they say of cats when they lose their kittens and you try to give the kittens back, the mother's forgotten them. That's nature's mercy, is memory problems, is because it hurts so much to remember the one that I am separated from, or the one I want to separate away from. And so that was her issue. We had to get to every time, because these conflicts, they happen. So it's this sudden shock, this thing that catches you off guard. And then there are tracks. These are like the reminders. So every time she got a text message, every time there was a court meeting, every time she was remembering, ooh, my child being torn from me, my child being separated from me. And where did it show up on her body? Because the body, again, it's this beautiful symbolism of your experience. It was like right between her breasts, right where you would hold your infant child, right there. That is where this psoriasis would show up for her. And so it was through her consciously describing, right? You have to get to the core. Like, what's the kernel of this conflict for me? Let me describe how I'm feeling. And then let me notice the stories that I have tied to this. Oh, he's going to be traumatized. My child's not going to be okay because of, but she had to rewrite it. And so it was through rewriting her story because this was one of those, when it comes to conflicts, there's either the practical. So the practical resolution for her obviously would be, let me keep my child with me all the time. Let me never, ever have to separate from my child. But in her situation, legally, that wasn't a possibility. She had to let her child go to be with the parent, and that was difficult for her, but she had to accept, this is what I'm working with, right? And this is, so she had to accept and transmute. She had to change her perspective of the situation. It was through that inner shifting and changing her story around, instead of every time the child's with the dad being like, oh no, this is terrible, like he's going to be traumatized, this is going to be awful, I'm going to have to pick up all the pieces. She had to imagine it going really well. Imagine it being a good situation, right? And using her consciousness, right, to rewrite the story. And so that's how she resolved the psoriasis. It was through this inner story shifting and this seeing, I can either paint a picture that's awful, or I could paint a picture that's beautiful, right? And so beautiful things started happening as she applied this and as she saw, ooh, this is life teaching me. This is life showing me something. And so that's another amazing story of, again, the tissues doing exactly what they're meant to do, programmed perfectly to help her through this unresolved conflict, but she had to evolve personally. She had to, instead of just accepting this is the way this person is, and she had some really brilliant experiences where she's like, oh, I just know he's gonna this, I just know it's gonna go that way. And when we worked on change that story, see it differently, imagine it going differently. And as she did that, as she really embodied this new reality she wanted to step into, really cool things started happening. And so she started to trust that by her changing her consciousness and changing what she was picturing to herself about the situation, it manifested on the physical outside. And so it was really cool.
That's beautiful. One question I have about as people listen to the application of this, I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. Does German medicine really have this does German new medicine have this concept of, okay, I have this particular ailment, we should look into this type of thing? Is it more open-ended in terms of just like you're struggling, let's see what's going on, or do specific body parts, organs, diseases tend to correlate with certain types of situations?
Oh, it's very specific. That's the thing, is that the biology specifically gives you the adaptation that is unique to your circumstance. And so if a person's dealing with teeth issues, we know there's a bite conflict. They want to bite, crush, defend, snap. They're wanting to use their teeth to defend themselves in some way. And the teeth are adapting because that person doesn't feel strong enough. They don't feel able. They don't feel capable. And so we have to look back in their history. Who did you want to bite? This is often these start very, very early, back in infancy. Mothers who, they're like, I have exclusively breastfed and I've only eaten organic food and I feed my children. I haven't given them any sugar, but their teeth are rotting away. What's going on with that? Well, we have to look back at the story. They're, and babies, while they're breastfeeding, will often bite their mothers.
I have a baby. I know that happens.
Will bite their mother. And if the mother responds in a way, and this isn't to feel bad in mothers, because you're human and someone biting your nipple, you're going to have a knee-jerk reaction. But if that child feels shocked and feels like unable to bite, unable to, to express themselves, unable to, and if they were scared enough, that can cause the teeth to start to decay. And so we look at, what happened, and there are beautiful ways of working with infants to tell them the story, to share with them, talking to the child while they're sleeping, telling them, oh, this really surprised me. Oh, this really shocked me and it hurt. And so you can communicate. Just like you can communicate with animals. Just because animals and infant babies don't have language, they are listening, they are understanding. And so when you share your experience with them, even things during gestation, really amazing story about a woman who had 2 children already, and she was pregnant again. She had a daughter and a son, and then she was pregnant with her third, and she comes from a family of girls, and she was really expecting that the third, she just knew. She's like, it's going to be a girl, and because she had sisters, and she was really excited for her daughter to have a sister. And then she finds out the gender of her child, and it's a boy. And so she had a moment, right? She, again, human. This is not something to feel bad about. It's simply something to recognize and become aware of. And so she had some gender shock, right? Some feeling of, or disappointment, or feeling like, I really thought it was going to be this, and now it's that, right? So it was unexpected. And as her son, he was around 2.5, and we got in a session, and she was, concerned with his testicles, because this is something that can happen where, the testicles are supposed to descend at a certain point, and she had noticed they hadn't, and, she starts searching and asking around, and, she's like, yeah, a lot of people have to do surgery for this. And so we ended up talking about what happened, during the gestation. Were there any, surprises regarding the gender, regarding him being a boy? And she's like, well, yeah, there were. And so the suggestion is, okay, so there's a story behind every conflict, right? There's a story, and we want to share that story. We don't want, when we have a secret or when we have something that just isn't expressed, it can stay in the psyche, right? It can just stay.
Don't I know it?
Stay unexpressed in the psyche. And so my recommendation to her was, okay, well, tell him the story while he's sleeping. Just tell him about how you had sisters, you came from a family of girls, you thought that you were really excited for, your daughter to have a sister. But now that you're here, I'm so grateful you're here. And now my son has a brother, and you're his brother, and I'm so happy that you're a boy, and you're just the perfect thing for our family. Just to express your heart in that way. Even if she believed and knew all of that, there's something about verbalizing it and expressing it. And 2 months after that session, we get on another call, and she says, well, not only did his testicles descend, just naturally, she said also his penis doubled in size.
Good job, Mom.
Right? And it was just how interesting that there was just a part of that child's psyche that was, my mother's not totally happy about this, And so, and just the subtlety of that. And again, it's not that she did anything bad or wrong. It was she, we do want to notice, okay, our expectations. I expected it to be this way, and it was that way. And if we don't kind of just flow with that and notice, I had some resistance, right? I had a story, I had an image, and reality showed me something different, that resistance. And it can unconsciously to us affect someone else. And so that's the beauty, again, that evolution of seeing, now that I'm seeing what the body is showing me. And so that's the cool thing is that, and a lot of times people, they do struggle sometimes when I share certain things. They'll be like, well, how can a baby have a self-devaluation conflict? How could they experience that? They're just pure love. They're just pure, but they are impressed upon by, like, in the womb by the things that they're hearing, even the reason that they were brought into existence, right? What was the circumstance of the conception itself? And all of that, like when children are unwanted, there's just this background feeling of, gosh, why do I feel like I don't belong here? Why do I feel like something's wrong with me? And then years later, they hear from an aunt or something that, yeah, your mom, considered aborting you. And when they hear that, they're like, oh, okay, this now makes sense. Right? And when we understand, there's really such a beautiful, when you look at the lineage and you look at the ancestry and you look at the family history, the things that we see in the children, often it's unresolved stuff from generations above. And when we can see and look at the story, then we see, there was an infidelity, right? There was a broken covenant, a broken promise, and that doesn't just go away, and that everyone is affected in their own way. And so it's through noticing, putting these pieces together, that sometimes your life can suddenly start making a whole lot of sense. Why you chose the career that you chose, the partner that you chose. I mean, even down to the name that your parents named you. What is the meaning there? And when you start seeing that, everything really does have this deep and beautiful meaning. Nothing is random. Everything is, again, orchestrated by that consciousness, trying to like wink, wink, like wake up. Can you see it? Can you see it's all happening? It's happening for you, but it's happening so that you will see beyond, because people are so busy, especially today, and they're, we lack that connection to consciousness, and we're just like, oh, we overlook the experience of animals and plants, and we just rush on to the next experience, and we eat unconsciously and we behave unconsciously. And it really is. It's like, when are you going to wake up?
Yeah. Well, I think this ties into that quintessence principle, which is so beautiful. And I think, German new medicine aside, it's something that I've just noticed, which is like, there are no accidents. All of life is happening for you. It's happening for all of us. And it's really just our way of relating to it that defines the experience. And it's such an empowering way to live. And I would be curious, I imagine there's a lot of people listening to this that are like, okay, so I just stopped taking my supplements. I just started eating like shit. And like, how do you advise people to kind of relate to the conventional kind of more physicalist interventions that we've really relied upon for our health and well-being, and this new perspective, which is much more, in my opinion, upstream of the physical expression?
Yes. So that was a question that I had too, because I'm like, when I worked as a chiropractor and people would come into this world and they'd start eating well and they'd exercise and start taking care of themselves, they would a lot of times get better, and diagnoses would go away, and physical health conditions would vanish when they started caring for themselves. And it was like, well, was it the food that you cut out, that inflammatory food, and that's the reason that your back pain went away? Or was that you started to revalue yourself? So you were living in a state of unconsciousness, eating unconsciously, living unconsciously, and you started to care, right? And so it's that it is still very important, because are you doing it consciously? Does it make sense why I'm eating what I'm eating? Or is it just convenience? And it's that, and that's where doing what makes sense is my philosophy. We do what makes sense. What is logical? Right? What's logical for the planet, for the community? Where does it make sense to get my food from? Right? Does it make sense? And if I knew the history and the origin of everything that I'm consuming and every, item that I'm wearing on my body, if I was really interested in the origin, right? That's the thing, is getting back to that ontogeny. Where does this come from? What's the origin story of this item of clothing or this piece of food? Where did you come from? What thought put into this, or was it simply about mass production, right, as much as possible? And so I find that people who are living consciously and are taking care of their bodies, everything that they do is conscious. They're thinking about it. And so that is why we do. It's beautiful to have well-sourced water and foods. And so you're still going to be, and moving the body. Every single joint in this body was designed for movement. And so it makes sense to move. It makes sense to live in alignment. And so all of these healthy things that we're doing it, it's like a different reason, right? Instead of I'm eating this food to make my body healthy and to not have inflammation in my body. Inflammation is an indication of healing. That means there was an adaptation. And so instead of looking at the downstream things, expecting the downstream things to affect the upstream, which they do, right? When I eat better, I feel better about myself. I say, oh, I'm an important thing. And it's very important that I put good, nourishing foods in my body. That's an act of revaluation. And so we have to see, how does this physical thing that I'm doing, how does that rearrange my psyche, right? In the way that I'm perceiving myself, in the way I'm experiencing the world. And so it all matters. We do both and. It's not either or. Oh, because all disease starts in the psyche, that means that I'm just going to eat like garbage. It's like, it's not, that even just thinking that, and that means, oh, I'm going to go unconscious in this regard. No, I mean, sometimes you can very consciously eat, some pizza or something that was, on the street corner, and you're just like, this is the best thing ever, right? And this is like the most nourishing and wonderful, fun thing. So it's not about the substance. It's not about the food. It's you. That's what I tell. It's not about the food. It's you. It's not the supplement. It's you. It's what it does for me. What does it turn on in me? How do I revalue myself? And yes, interacting with elements of the earth, it does change the way that you feel, right? When you're grounded, when you're out in the sunshine, when you swim in the ocean, those are very real experiences. And we can see that it's a feedback loop, right? And so as you do more conscious things and live in a more conscious way, that improves how you feel about yourself, you revalue yourself. And so that's where you can resolve a lot of conflicts through lifestyle improvement. But again, as we see, it's not a panacea. We can't lifestyle our way out of certain conflicts. We have to address the root of this. What's going on with me, right? Even though I've done all the right things, I'm eating all the right things, but there's that conflict that is unresolved, or that, there's something in my family lineage that hasn't been addressed, and it's a secret that nobody talks about. And it's like, ooh, why does it show up? It shows up so that you acknowledge it, right? And you redeem it, and you tell a new story.
You break the chain.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I'm totally with you on not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and, continuing to do all the things. One thing I have always wondered, though, is I've noticed it's really like the consciousness almost creates instructions for the body to follow. And I've seen this time and time again. I've seen this with a lot of spiritual teachers I've worked with where, if you believe that, oh, I have to eat this way in order to feel good, guess what? You have to eat that way in order to feel good. And we live in this culture of, just like people just like obsessing over the food and the EMFs and the water and the this and the that. And then I notice as soon as someone deviates from that rigidity, their body starts to go in a spiral. And then I see people who don't give a shit about it, and they seem to be doing just fine. And so I can't help but wonder, like, I'm sure there are some things that are better for us than not, but to what degree are we just literally creating our entire experience with the consciousness versus like these things actually really being the reason why we're healthy or not?
Yeah. You are writing your own laws.
That's right. You're writing your own laws.
And I wrote those laws because that was, I was very militant about my lifestyle improvements when I was in that world. I would go to my parents' house and I'd take everything out of their cupboards and I'd look at, I'd read the labels to them and say, this causes cancer and this is bad and this is bad. And I tell people, when you're eating sugar, it's feeding cancer cells and and I thought that I was doing a good thing. But what I was doing is instilling this fear into people and this kind of just paranoia about food. And I still see people in, that field do things like that. Oh, if you wear AirPods, you're getting, it's just like, and I do now see it. It's coming from me. It is, I decide what this means for me. I decide how this affects me. And when you become the measure of all things, right? When it's like this, everything that enters my body comes into rhythm with the vibration that I choose, And so that's the ultimate. I don't want to make an idol out of an outside thing and say this electromagnetic frequency has power over me. And so now I need to shield myself from this thing, right? I've made it an idol. I've put it above me. I've put it above consciousness. But that's the thing, when you realize that everything comes down to consciousness itself, which is what concentrated, organized light. It's like if that light is shining from me, to the pure, all things are pure. And that, and a lot of people in the bad toxins, but the toxins are real. People really like to tell me how real the toxins are. But it's like, I do believe in the transmutation of elements through consciousness. Because doesn't it all come back to, I mean, is there anything that is made, anything that is physical that doesn't have its origin in nature? Yes, have we tried to pervert it? And yes, has man said, aha, we can change this and we can alter it? And it's like, there's always, when you violate natural law, there are consequences, and I do think that that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing the effort to replace consciousness, but there's no replacement. I mean, ultimately, even the further you try to get from it, that's what you will eventually, everything is going to boil down to that. And it's just the fun game that we're playing on the way to people waking up and realizing it. And it's fun to go unconscious, right? If everything was just all conscious all of the time, it's like, it's beautiful and it's fun, but it's like, oh, let's play with a little unconsciousness. Let's pretend that everything isn't consciousness. And let's pretend that that stuff is really bad. Let's pretend that this is terrible and it's going to hurt me. This gives you a little thrill. Let's watch the horror movie.
Well, I think also a lot of the things about like, this is bad and like, I'm doing everything right. It gives people a sense of control, and it satisfies a lot of unconscious patterns around self-safety and protection. And what's so amazing, I mean, I had someone on the podcast recently that is a breatharian. They survive on chi energy alone, and apparently there's 200,000 people that do that. And I think there's just like such a quick impulse to say that's wrong because it doesn't mirror your own experience, versus claiming the power that we all have, right? That like, no, we can evolve and get to a place where we get to choose like how things impact us and how things unfold and what is actually true or required for each of us. And it's just it's a step in the journey that I think I'm hoping more and more people come to.
Right? Yeah, and it's just what's possible. And what are your hard lines? It has to be this way. It must, again, people do. We like to build our own little fiefdom, our little kingdom of this is how it is. And, so opening up to maybe how I have decided it isn't the only way. Maybe there are other ways. And it's just being curious and open and letting yourself, so is there a right way? Is there a wrong way? Or is this just, consciousness, again, expressing through all these different variations and finding what's the most fun, right? What's the most pleasing? What do I enjoy the most? And that's my journey. It's like, this makes the most sense. This made sense to me for a while, to be really strict and really rigid and, and then, loosening up and kind of getting rid of every idea for a while felt good. And then coming back to certain things. And it's like you have that permission to craft your experience in the way that makes the most sense, and all along your biology. And that's the cool thing about the 5 biological laws is no matter what, your body is adapting to your experience. So if you are believing, and I've seen people who have developed adaptations because of their fear of toxins. So they move somewhere and they're like, oh, you're living on a golf course. Oh, don't you know how many toxins there are there? And it's so bad and it's so terrible. And then this person developed an adaptation in their body, not because of the toxins that were being, and it's very easy to see how it seems as though it was the toxins that did the thing and caused the bad thing to happen in the body. But it's like, no, let's pull the thread more. Let's not leave it at just the physical, this to that. It's like, what was your experience? Oh, I felt like I needed to get away from here. I needed to hurry up and get out of this place. And so, okay, well, it makes sense that your thyroid would proliferate additional cells because the thyroid's about speeding up, right? If you're feeling like, oh, I need to get rid of this thing. I need to get out of here, right? The thyroid is coming in to proliferate additional cells in order to speed you up. And so it's like, ooh, maybe it isn't the thing that we're saying it is. Maybe it's not the outside thing. Because often we do see people are like, oh, this causes that. Well, does it cause it 100% of the time and 100% of the people? No, it doesn't. It's all about the uniqueness of the experience of the individual. And that's where nothing else, no other system or theory that I've come across really gets to the uniqueness of your matrix of beliefs and experiences and really can pinpoint exactly how you felt in that moment. And that's what the biology is doing. It's how you felt, the felt experience of that shock. That's what turns on. It's called the DHS, which is in honor of Dr. Hamer's son, the Dirk Hamer syndrome. And you mentioned the brain earlier because there's an impact. And this was where Dr. Hamer's, this is what takes this body of work. Because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, Louise Hay and, mind-body connection. And this is, psychosomatic, because that had been around for, hundreds of years. People have been looking at the connection between the psyche and the psychology and the biology. But Dr. Hamer, he, in the CT scan of the brain, he sees an impact in the particular area of the brain that controls that organ. And so that's what brings us into the world of objective science, where you can actually do a CT brain scan, and it's basically showing every conflict you've ever had and the things that are active, the things that are resolved. And so that's one of the very cool things about this work. So people, you can have a CT scan with no contrast and have it analyzed, and you can see exactly where your conflicts are in the brain.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. So you can use the brain, and you can also use the kind of common, if it's this, it might be these things, to essentially start to have a hypothesis.
Exactly. So it's the psyche brain organ. So this is the first biological law, as the connection between the psyche. So that's so your psyche isn't your conscious mind. Your psyche is your whole beingness, right? So your consciousness is constantly detecting the safety or danger of your environment. And so the psyche is picking up on things that are shocking, unexpected, and as soon as there is something that kind of reaches that threshold for this is I'm isolated, I don't have help. Because if you have immediate help, if you have immediately, you can share your experience with someone, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm okay, I'm resourced. This isn't, a big long-term problem. That may not register as a shock, but it's these things that we're like, I feel all alone in this. I feel like all alone in this.
Right.
And so that's when the body steps in. And so when that happens, there's the psyche experiences the conflict. The brain, so depending again on the exact flavor of that experience. So was this a separation, right? Where someone touched me and I was like, I do not want this touch. I want to separate from this. Or was it an indigestible morsel, this thing that I expected to get that I didn't get and I just can't stomach it and I'm angry? Or was it, I want to bite your head off? Or was it, oh, I feel so devalued, I feel so broken, I feel not capable? Or was it that I'm feeling attacked, right? What was the flavor, the essence of that shock? What was it about? And so depending on what the thing that happened, what it was about, there's an impact in the brain in that specific area that controls the organ, and then the organ adapts. It either goes into hyperfunction to assist you or it goes into hypofunction to assist you. So the body is always going through, so like the play dead reflex, for example, the body has the ability to turn off motor function to a body part. It can turn it off. Why would it do that? Well, if you have a predator that is looking for you to be moving and alive in order to say, ooh, this is a good thing for me to eat, it would be very good if your body could be completely still and have no function, right? Like not even have motor signals going. And so when someone's dealing with paralysis makes sense because you had a moment where you were frozen in fear, paralyzed with shock, feeling totally stuck, totally frozen. And your brain said, we have to stop sending messages to that muscle so that it plays dead. And we see this, right? And then the animal, there are amazing videos of animals out in the wild, and then they shake, right? When afterwards, that's the seizure. So if someone's dealing with a seizure disorder, and they're having spasms or they're having, full body seizures, that's when the muscles wake back up after going to sleep because there was a conflict that initiated the paralysis. And so every single time there is something weird going on in the body, there's a reason that the body did it. And that's what we're always looking for, is what is the reason the body turned on that program? Why is there a lump here? Why is this growth here?
Getting to the source code.
Precisely.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about the healing process, right? And because I think it's a hard concept for someone to be like, oh, I have throat cancer. My body's helping me out, right? What do I do next? Mm-hmm. How do you advise people when we start to notice the symptomology of this supposedly helpful mechanism in happening in ways that seem potentially dangerous?
Yes, and they are, in the sense that, as soon as a conflict happens, like a timer starts, right? Because we can be in conflict for an unbiological amount of time. In nature, things are quick, right? We are almost getting eaten by the predator, and then we just get away. And then, okay, now that I'm out of that threat, my body can go into the healing and restore right away. But when we are in conflict for years and years and years, when there has been excessive tissue adaptation, there is an amount of tissue adaptation that isn't survivable, and so that is understanding that can be the case. That's why we want to catch these conflicts as quickly as possible. I want to know. And so when you're in a conflict, you have compulsive thinking, right? You keep thinking about the problem because you may have trouble sleeping, so we want to notice the keys of when I'm in a conflict, my hands are cold, my feet are cold. Again, that preoccupied thinking, I'm waking up in the middle of the night with that thing on my mind, my appetite's down. And so you want to notice, when am I in this conflict? What do I need a solution? Where do I need to find, to resolve this conflict? We want to do it as quickly as possible because, again, the longer you've been in the conflict, the more tissue adaptation. So if you have this ugly, indigestible thing you've been dealing with for years and years and years, I know someone who, dealt with a really ugly divorce, right? And this was just a very ugly thing that they just could not digest, and they kept having relapses of this colon cancer diagnosis, and they keep cutting out feet and feet and feet of the colon because that's the conventional solution is like, okay, well, this is a bad thing your body is doing. You've got bad genes and your body just keeps making this cancer. Well, no, there was a contentious divorce and ugly things happening with the ex and, dragging them into court and money and all of this stuff involved. And so that went on for years. It went on for years and years and years, and it wasn't solved. It wasn't resolved. And so if we can't resolve the conflict, we just keep cutting the organ out, right? And so there's a great quote, I think it might be Shelton, surgeons can cut out everything but cause.
Wow.
We can cut out the organ, and sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes the tumor has grown, and it's not. This is the essence, though. It's okay to get a surgery. Wonderful surgeons have learned how to take the body apart and put it back together again. We're appreciative of that wisdom. We want to do it for the right reason, though. We don't want to do it because we say, this is a malignant, bad, horrible thing. Your body is attacking itself. That's what I call biological warfare. That's biological terrorism, to make you afraid, or this diagnosis of autoimmune. Well, your body's just attacking itself. That's why the body never, ever, 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 ever attacks itself. The body only does what makes sense. If it appears to my mind that the body is attacking itself, I'm missing a context. I'm missing the context, which makes it make sense that the body has grown an enormous tumor. And the situation is, it's the unresolved conflict that went on for an unbiological period of time, longer than it would have in nature, without a resolution. The body is just your faithful servant. That's like, you keep saying this thing is indigestible, so I keep giving you this additional tissue to help you to digest this. And so it's because not a fault with the body, it's fault in the environment, in the experience, in the unresolved conflict in my soul that I have not found yet a solution for. And so that's what I really want people to understand, is that your body does not work against you. It doesn't make sense. Just think about it. Why would it make sense in any, whether you believe that, the body just randomly evolved this way? Well, what evolution is what makes sense, right? The body evolves to continue life. So why would it make sense for the body to evolve a mechanism that destroys itself? Doesn't make sense, right? Or if you believe God divinely created this body, why would God put in the body this thing that causes it to break down and die? Neither of those philosophies make sense when you really, really think about it. The body doesn't make sense. The body is doing what makes sense. I'm doing something that doesn't make sense, right? I'm living in conflict with someone. I'm not making peace. I am being stubborn. I am, saying it has to be this way, and I am living in resistance. Right? And that's what I find it all does. It comes down to, something that I have not yet learned how to adapt to the reality of the situation. And I haven't used my creative imagination to imagine a different outcome. And I'm staying in some type of unresourceful, unresolved life situation, rather than, contacting the creative intelligence that, I believe that there's a solution for everything. And it's often that we just get stuck and limited. We limit our creativity, so we limit consciousness, and we say, this could never be different. Right. And it's like, could it never be different? Or are you limiting consciousness? You're limiting.
We are. Well, and to be fair, we've been told that, right? Sure. We've had that program installed in our brain, in our consciousness about what is possible and the ways to fix things. And, that's a big part of the journey is untangling those things. A question I have for you is, I imagine, an immense amount of people will listen to this and just have a tremendous skepticism and resistance to these ideas. When you work with people, what are those most common things that come up, and how do you help people open up to something different?
Yeah, usually by the time people come and talk to me, they've already have been demystified from the other ways of doing things, and they have gotten, it's one of those like, oh, I'm finally here. So they've seen the things that don't work, right? They thought that the nutrition, they thought that doing everything this way would make their symptoms go away. And so often I'm not in the business of convincing people that this is true, that because they are biological laws, it's an empirical science, which means that you can observe it in your own experience. And so you have to watch, you have to pay attention. I want you to have a direct experience of seeing a conflict turn in, an experience turn into an adaptation, turn into a symptom. It's experience, adaptation, symptom.
And just really quick on that, I want to make sure to underscore this point. Like that, there can be an immense amount of time lapse between experience and noticeable adaptation. Right? It's because the story with Dr. Hamer makes it seem like son died, got cancer. And then clearly there's people that are having adaptations. It's like, I was in a fight with my brother 20 years ago, and we don't talk to each other for 20 years, and now I'm sick. Right? So there can be a high degree of variance there.
So when the symptoms come on, we have to look, something shifted pretty recently. Because the body, again, is actively adapting to the situation. And so, yes, the seeds of the situation could have been planted back in your childhood, but there's something that's happening and has been going on now. Something shifted recently in order for this tissue to go into the repair phase. So it could be an indigestible, situation from years ago that started when you were a child, but every time there are these things that's called a track. So every time you step on the track, right, you go back into the adaptation. And so if you're constantly on that track, that the body is in that adaptation phase. And when you finally, sometimes, it takes a person dying, it's like, oh, now that conflict. So a conflict is resolved when it can't happen again, or when you can laugh about it, when it's like, done, right? If it could still happen again, it's like a program on your computer, right? It's like, I might need that program. I'm not going to close out of that. I'm going to, I'm just going to leave it running in the background, right? And so but it's done when I just know that I'm going to need this adaptation again. I'm never going to need this particular program to be activated. That's when it fully resolves. And so a lot of our conflicts are, some of them aren't resolvable. Some of them happen so early and they so have shaped you that you will kind of have them active in your life at some level. And that really all depends on the type of conflict that it is. And there's also something called a constellation. So a constellation is when there's two conflicts on opposite sides of the brain. And this is what is responsible for what we call mental illness or neurodivergence. It's these conflicts that are affecting two sides of the brain that then, when they happen together, it changes your personality and your behavior. So if you are hyperactive, if you you bounce your foot and you move, you had a double motor conflict where you felt stuck. Right? We stick kids in schools, which doesn't make sense. We say, don't move. And they're like feeling stuck and they're just like shaking because they want, I was walking through the airport yesterday seeing people just like bounce. It's like, I have this compulsion to move because I was told to sit still. Right? And so we want to notice, this makes sense that this person is behaving this way. It makes sense if this conflict can't ever fully be resolved. And so there are things that we will have with us our whole lives and some other things that we will resolve. But always when someone does develop a symptom, we always look at what changed in your life right before the symptom came on. Because there will have been some type of shift. Either you just realized, oh, yeah, that's no longer an issue. That there was some type of realization, and you may not be conscious of it, right? Sometimes it does take some digging, but when a person develops symptoms, we're always pulling the thread of the story. What happened before this symptom came on? I know a woman who developed a breast adaptation, right? And it was right after, so she lost her father suddenly. So there was a sudden death. She had just seen him, and then there was this terrible car accident, and she knew that she was in conflict. Luckily, she knew this beforehand. She had come across my videos on YouTube, like learning about the 5 biological laws, and so she was really distraught about this loss for a couple of months, and she was like, constantly thinking about it, constantly just in grief and mourning, and she just knew, I need to resolve this. I need to, really go deep and resolve this conflict. And it was right after that, like within a couple of days to weeks, where she's like, oh, there's the lump. right? There's the body coming in with the healing phase. That's what that lump was for her, was her body coming in to heal it. And so there is always going to be a story. You want to pull the thread to see something shifted right before this. But yes, like you said, the conflict could have happened years ago.
Got it. So noticing that distinct adaptation timeline is like a big part of the process.
You have to build the timeline. Yep, building the timeline, and that's why, and that's the cool thing is once you learn this map, I've never ever seen it wrong or inaccurate. There's always a conflict. And even when people are skeptical, so Dr. Hamer, he used to do these panels, these university level panels, because that's kind of like the highest degree of testing his theory. Was he'd go to these university panels, and this one was in Trnava, and basically he'd be given like 8 different cases. Here's the patient's case file, here are some of their scans, blood work, CT, and here's the patient, and they're like, okay, and then all these doctors would be at the board and be like, okay, Hamer, show us how your 5 biological laws work. And so there was this man who, when Dr. Hamer looked at his brain scan, he saw an impact in a very specific area. And so he knew that this conflict, he had to have had an attack against the heart conflict. And so the man is there, and Dr. Hamer is asking him all of these questions for an hour. Asking him, were there any heart issues with your parents? Did you ever have a heart attack? Did your wife, did anybody, asking for over an hour. And the person's like, no, every question. And then they go into the next hour, and, the doctors on the panel are like, okay, Hamer, maybe you're wrong sometimes. Maybe it's not always like that. Let's move on with it. And no, Dr. Hamer, he kept asking. He's like, did you ever have a dog with a heart issue? And all of a sudden, the patient was like, he remembers this story from like years and years ago where there was a festival or some holiday in the country where there was a goose, like you needed to have a goose dinner. And it was the night before that holiday, and he hears the dogs barking in the backyard, and he goes out to see the dogs, and there was a goose thief. Someone was coming to steal the goose on, the night of before this holiday or whatever. And so the man goes to confront him, and the goose thief turns around and has an axe and hits him right in the chest with an axe.
Holy crap.
I mean, how more literal of a attack against the heart conflict. But this man, was more than, so many 20 or more years ago, did not remember it. But it happened. And so again, Dr. Hamer, because of these laws, he's like, this impact would not be in the brain at this location unless this experience happened to you at some point. And so your inability to remember what happened, or you saying, never, nope, I'll talk to people sometimes and they're like, nope, never happened. I never had anything like that happen. It's like, well, is it possible you don't remember? Or again, with those separation conflicts, we have intentional memory loss. And so just because you don't have a conscious recollection of it, or if you're like, I was a baby, I was too young to be having an experience, it's like, no, your consciousness was learning and absorbing information ever since from that moment of conception. And so it does, for a person who, gets skeptical, often it's just they haven't inquired enough, and they haven't, gotten curious enough. They're sticking to their story that it never happened, and there's no way, or I was a baby, or it was too early. And it's like there's always a story. And when you're interested in origins, there's always a story. And that's why really getting fascinated about the origin. Why am I the way that I am? Why do I see the world the way that I see it? Why did my parents see it the way they did? What happened to them? What happened to my ancestors? And before you know it, you're really getting connected with your deep roots.
Yeah. And, that journey of discovery is the most interesting thing there is. So if people wanted to arm themselves, and maybe that's not the right word, but support themselves by learning these principles, learning about German New Medicine, is there a seminal book or guide or course? Where's the best place to get started?
Yeah, so if you're just wanting to dabble, I have a video called GNM 101 on YouTube is a great place to start. And then there are seminar lectures so there's this man, Helmut Pilhar, whose daughter had cancer when she was a child. And it was, she had a Wilms tumor, and it was her mother went to work, and she had this liver adaptation because she refused to eat the food that her grandmother prepared for her. So a mother goes off to work. right? And the child's like, I won't eat this food that my grandmother has prepared, and she developed a liver cancer, basically. But the the authorities got involved, and they were chased all around Europe because they basically were forcing chemo on this child, because that's something that does happen in this day and age, where we've got a conventional system that sees if your child in any way enters the medical system, and the medical system says, oh, we have diagnosed your child with the brain cancer, with liver cancer, and then if you don't follow their protocols, they see this as endangering your child, and they can come after you. And there are some like horror stories about people getting in the system. And so Helmut, he was one of those people, and his daughter was forced to have chemo. And then he's had found Dr. Hamer. And so basically he became one of Dr. Hamer's main teachers of the work. And so he would travel all over Europe, giving lectures, sharing the biological laws, and back then, people would come and try to, sabotage his events and things like that, because, it is rather controversial, because obviously this is not accepted mainstream. Dr. Hamer, he would submit his thesis in 1981. He submitted his thesis to the University of Tübingen, and they will not look at it formally, because as soon as it's looked at formally, and accepted, even though he did have all of these university validations these verifications where they're like, yeah, it's follow all these biological laws that he has laid out. Each of these cases follows, like there's no deviation from the laws. They're each presented in these cases. But obviously here we are today in 2025, and hardly anybody knows about it. Conventional medical practice is not at all influenced by Dr. Hamer, and so it's a bit taboo. But there are lectures. The lectures from Helmut have been translated into English, and so that is what I consider, the core education for people who really want to dive deep into this, is to get the study pack. There's like 60 different videos where you understand the basics, and it's not something that's quick to learn, because it's you have to learn the germ layers and the brain layers, and just getting into biological thinking. That's really the essence of this, because we are so unbiological in our lifestyles, right? Like, again, the fact that daycares exist, unbiological. The fact that schools exist, unbiological. We would really live in a very, very different way if we lived in alignment with our biology, with nature, with doing what makes sense in order to raise, children that are not conflicted from day one. In modern society, conflicted from day one. Constellated from day one, from the things that we do in the hospital. That's why I'm very passionate about women learning this knowledge. I have a course called The Biological Woman that I co-teach with a dear friend, and it is all about women understanding how your body parts work, and living in confidence, and understanding, your cycle, understanding fertility, understanding, conflicts, and how we can unconsciously live in ways where we think we're doing the best. Parents really do think they're doing the best thing for their children by getting them injected. And they think they're doing the best thing for their children by having them born in a hospital. They think they're doing the best thing for their children by, giving them medication. And it's because they have been, brainwashed away from their biological knowing. You have to, in order to allow your child to be taken from you and have, a small portion of their body cut off, or have them injected and jabbed with needles, and they're saying, no, this will be good for you later. Even though you see and you're witnessing with your own eyes extreme suffering in this moment, this child doesn't understand a future benefit. It understands, I'm not feeling safe and protected by my only source of safety and protection in the world, which is you, and that breaks a bond. That breaks a part of that child, in the sense that they're like, is this going to happen again? How can I be sure that this isn't going to happen again? And that's where these conflicts start, these scare frights, these territorial, this is where, the whole spectrum, right, of autism, of neurodivergence. When does this happen? It happens when a child is shocked with fear or shocked with anger, and something happens during the birth process, during these and so I really highly, highly encourage, women and men, really everyone, because you're operating in this world. You have this biological system that you are operating through. And if you don't understand how it works and you are doing things that are not in alignment with your biology, unconsciously you are, causing conflicts to yourself, unconsciously inflicting conflicts on others. And so it's absolutely vital. This really is our birthright. And this is the ancient wisdom. This is why it's called the Germanische Heilkunde. It's not about Germany, the country. It's about the Germanic peoples who lived in harmony with nature, who they, and there's this Tacitus, he was, this Roman scribe who went to the Germanic people and studied the way that they lived, and they lived in harmony with nature. They built their homes alongside the rivers, and Rome at the time, they wanted to come in and say, oh, don't you want this gold? Don't you want to trade this money? And they're like, they had this beautiful, harmonious way of living with nature. They'd have this thing called the thing, right, where they'd all come together. It's depicted. It's in the television program Vikings, right? Because this is what we're hearkening back to. These Viking tribes, and they lived in a certain way, and they'd all come together and air grievances and resolve conflicts, and they'd all come together to help one another. So it's very much like the Germanic is about brotherhood, sisterhood, kinship, family, and love, and living in harmony with the land, with nature. So this Germanic healing knowledge, the difference of the name, like the German new medicine, Dr. Hamer, when he kind of changed the name, he's like, it's no longer new, right? This has been around for, 40 years now. And as far as, medicine, and I do think it is beautiful in the sense like the medicine, it really is, you are the medicine. Right? You are. It's within you to heal, to resolve these things, but it is by getting back to this healing knowledge of nature, of what you should have known all along, right? We should have been born with this, but, we had to go unconscious and move away from nature to see how it doesn't yield the best results, right? And I think that we're at this kind of pinnacle of seeing how living in fear of microscopic particles, living in fear of germs is not the way. Because the germs are there to help us. The bacteria, the things that people are thinking, oh, if I just put this mask on, if I just inject my body with this potion, I'm going to be protected from all the little microbes. The little microbes, they are there for our service, right? They're part of nature. Yeah. And so, it's so expansive when you really get into this. It's a whole paradigm shift. It's a whole new way of doing things. Everything that you've done so far that has been great for your health, you're going to see it in just a little bit of a different way, about how it has shaped your psyche, your consciousness, and I just think it's the coolest thing ever.
I think so too, and I think it seems like, based on what's happening, and that a lot of humanity is now ready for this, and we're moving into this new phase of openness to these ideas and awareness about a lot of the ideas that we've been holding haven't been serving us, and so I'm very grateful for people like yourself out there spreading this information, helping people. And I want to give you an opportunity, if people want to know more about your work, where should they get started? Where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, so drmelissasell.com. I do have a whole range of courses. Like I said, the Biological Woman we're starting up in a couple of weeks, which is, just this core body of knowledge for women to understand how your breasts work, how your ovaries work, how your cervix works, the uterus, how all of these tissues function, and what conflicts are behind. We talk about hormones. We talk about, the expression of masculine, feminine, because that's a beautiful thing that people are waking up to, is this women trying to take the role of men taking the role of women. It's like, this is the biology, right? It's encoded in our biology, this expression. And so the Biological Woman course is coming up. I also have courses on all different conflicts. So indigestible morsels. How can I understand myself in this different way? How can I notice, identity conflicts? That one's really interesting. If you've ever dealt with hemorrhoids, if you've ever dealt with, issues with your the stomach, ulcers, identity conflicts, territorial anger. I've got a whole host of different courses that help you to understand how is this present in my life, and what can I do to resolve it, right? How is this present in my life? How can I, awareness is really the core tool that I use. Is like, you have to see it. Do you see it?
Step one.
Do you know? I have a course called Awareness School, actually, which is all about, paying attention to what goes on in your head all day. How do you react? What are your micro reactions to things when you're offended or your feelings are hurt? It's like, have you pulled that thread? What's behind that? Are you paying attention? And so it really is, pay attention, open your eyes. Are you seeing? Are you seeing? There's nothing is meaningless. Everything in your life is pointing you back to something. It's pointing you back to something that is needed for your evolution, for your growth, right? To up level so that you can best express yourself and really, again, have the most fun. This is about, we need.
You can do both. You can grow and you can have fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's the fun, it's the joy, it's the expression. It's like, what are you here for? Is it to be very serious and always just do the right thing? And it's like, I'm here to make mistakes and to grow and to learn and to forgive myself and forgive others and to see a new reality. And so there's just so much available and so much possible. And that's really, I just want to, connect people with the truth that's within them and the truth that sets them free. And so that's the core message. It's, this body of knowledge has set me the most free. I'm no longer seeing things through this is bad and, this is going to make me unhealthy, through understanding everything is meaningful. Everything is meaningful adaptation. And that's what I want for people is, to connect them with that deep peace that comes with the truth.
Well, that's beautiful. And we're very grateful that you're doing it. And I'll make sure to link all those out for everyone so that they're easy to find.
Excellent.
Thanks again, Dr. Melissa. This has been a lot of fun and very informative.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love any chance I get to talk about this, because when I first came across this, I was like, why isn't everyone shouting this from the rooftops? This is the most amazing, I consider, hidden body of work, right? This just like esoteric knowledge that is just our birthright. Like, we need to know this. I need to know how my organs function and how I can optimize and how I can, understand sickness, because people, this day, they're so limited by what they believe to be a dysfunction in their body. But when they see this is intelligent function, your body's doing the right thing, there's just something that's unresolved. And when we find it, you can grow.
Well, I think that's a beautiful ending point. Thanks again. And thank you for everybody for listening.